When I first arrived in Maine, I took the time to set up a simple humanure composting system, which consists of 5-gallon plastic buckets where I go to the bathroom and then cover that with sawdust, and then a compost bin, which is where the buckets get dumped to make a compost pile. Now, that system was built in the late spring and served me very well through the spring, summer, and fall. And I had every expectation that it was going to serve me equally as well in the winter, and did not anticipate some of the problems that I ran into. The biggest problem for sure was that everything froze, and I just didn't account for that. Looking back, it seems kind of obvious that that would have caused problems, but I just wasn't thinking of it at the time when I built it. So the two ways that that caused problems are, one, when you dump new compost in on top of old compost, you're supposed to dig down a little bit into the compost that's already in the bin to dump the new compost inside of it. It's just supposed to help with the composting process. Well, with everything frozen solid, I was able to dig the snow off the top of the compost bin and move the straw, but I couldn't dig into the compost. It was just a solid lump. So I kind of had to decide, well, if I'm going to dump anything in the winter, it's going to have to be right on top of the frozen pile that I have there. So that was the first problem. But the second problem was even more challenging, which was I was composting into these buckets or going to the bathroom in these buckets and doing it in groups. So I would get 4 to 6 buckets and then I would dump them all at one time into the compost bin. And I was storing the buckets that I was preparing to dump later outside because the storage space in my home is actually quite small. And I also didn't like the idea of my own pee and poop lying around in my indoor place. And so they were just being stored outside. Well, as you might guess by now, it's pretty obvious that when I went to dump them, the buckets were frozen solid and I just couldn't get the stuff to come out, which left me in a bit of a pickle. Now, the easy solution to get the buckets thawed out was just to take them inside. But the confounding factor there, which was really concerning to me, is those buckets had sat outside and frozen, which means they probably may have swollen a little bit. It was possible the buckets had cracks. And if I just brought all those buckets in and thawed them out, if any one of them was cracked, I'd be having excrement secreting out all over my floor, which really creeped me out and wasn't something that I really wanted to have to deal with. And so I had to think for a while about the best way to solve it, to be able to continue to compost in the winter just to get that stuff out of the bucket. And what I settled on was just bringing in one frozen bucket at a time, and I would set it in my utility sink and just kind of keep an eye on it, making sure that it didn't have a crack and wasn't leaking. That way, as it thawed out, if it did have a leak, it would be slow enough that it would go into the sink and drain into my drainage bucket, and I wouldn't have to be cleaning it up all over the floor. So I would just leave it in there until it seemed like it had thawed out enough, and then I would set it aside and put another bucket in there and continue in that manner. And as it turned out, none of the buckets did have a crack, but I was very happy to have taken that extra precautionary step. So once I got that accomplished and I had thawed out the number of buckets that I wanted to, then I was able to come out here, dig down to at least the frozen compost pile and get everything dumped and proceed like I had been doing the rest of the year. One of the things I might do differently next year is just dump the buckets as they get full. That'll work around the problem of them becoming frozen because I have my composting toilet inside. All in all, it was definitely some unexpected and frustrating surprises, but I was able to figure out a solution, and I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to have nearly a struggle next year because I'm aware of these problems now.